So I've been thinking a lot about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, and while the game is still a ways away, if everything is going according to plan, we could potentially get that game coming out sometime in 2027, which is great. But I've been thinking about how the developers have been slowly trickling out information for us, and we're going to get more information sometime next year around this time frame, maybe even earlier, like in September. And we've discussed a myriad of these things on the channel, and I kind of want to do a recap of stuff we know so far, but also add some new stuff because you guys have left some really great comments and suggestions on previous videos about stuff you want to see in Remake Part 3, specific changes, valid criticisms to things like exploration, combat, side quest structure, all of that good stuff. So that's what we're going to focus on in today's video. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button. And if you're new here and you just want to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments down below on anything that we discuss in today's video. We are inching closer somehow to 3,000 subscribers, which is bananas. And all of the help and support that you guys have been giving the channel is greatly appreciated. So the genesis, so to speak, for this video, no pun intended, initially started off as stuff we could see in 7 Remake Part 3 that could then transfer over to Final Fantasy XVII. But we did a video recently kind of talking about the future of Final Fantasy XVII, addressing some rumors about people like Hideaki Itsuno joining Square Enix, maybe going to more of a character action direction with that game. So I kind of feel like we've done that video already. But I do feel like some of the stuff we discuss in this video could still apply to a Final Fantasy XVII in terms of, exploration, combat stuff. But I thought it would be nice to have a video kind of encapsulating everything we know so far, but also incorporating a lot of those really great suggestions from you guys. So starting off first, the most obvious is new playable characters. Now, obviously we're going to get Vincent, we're going to get Cid, it's going to be awesome, but I'm so intrigued to see how these characters perform. With Vincent, we kind of already gotten to use him in a game like Dirge of Cerberus, which granted was not a great game, very clunky, weird story stuff. It was kind of like this weird Vincent fan fiction that was just not great. But I kind of still feel like that's a bit of a blueprint for a character like Vincent. And with him being a ranged shooter, you got to find a way to differentiate him from Barrett, who is also a very powerful, tanky ranged shooter. So you could very well make Vincent a much more agile shooter, maybe even more of a glass cannon, so to speak. So I would expect him to have, good attack power, high speed and accuracy, a character that can really flip and dip around the battlefield. Now, what's going to make Vincent the most unique are his limit breaks. Once he transforms, we're probably going to lose control of him. So he's going to very much be probably like a summon, this really gigantic, powerful creature that's on screen for a specific amount of time. Maybe we could issue commands to him. Maybe we could even do some really cool synergy stuff with him, which I think would be sick. But seeing how they're going to balance that in gameplay is incredibly interesting, because when Vincent transforms, we all expect him to be powerful, much like he was in Rebirth. So how do you kind of power scale that to make him strong, but not as strong as, say, like a summon would be? So that'll be very interesting to figure out. Secondly is Cid. Again, I think kind of a blueprint for Cid is what we saw in the intermission DLC with Sonon. Now, I don't expect Cid to play exactly like Sonon. Both characters are Dragoons, so I do expect there to be some sort of similarity. But Cid could be a character that is very much a mid-range to even long-range combatant. He's obviously going to need to get up close to poke people with that spear, but I could totally see him having abilities where maybe he just straight up throws the spear at an airborne enemy, or he comes equipped automatically with the jump ability, which is, if I remember correctly, his first limit break that he actually gets. So if he could get like a super powered jump attack that maybe does AoE damage instead of hitting one singular enemy, I think that would be sick. But what I'm most excited to see, oddly enough, isn't the combat stuff, it's the character banter between all of these characters now. The characters have some really great one-liners in and outside of combat, and I'm so excited to hear what Matt Mercer is going to do as Vincent, because Vincent is that lovable edgelord. He's kind of weird and goofy at times, and he just kind of barely crosses the line of being that like emo teen edgelord, but in a cool way. So hearing what he thinks is cool while he's in battle, some of those battle phrases, I think is going to be great. There's also Cid, who is 32 years old, but is often portrayed as this 55-year-old curmudgeon. So hearing what he's going to say in battle, is he going to swear? What's he going to complain about? And again, we're going to get way more Cid stuff in Remake Part 3 because he shares a pretty decent amount of screen time in that game with a character like Tifa, because, spoiler alert, we're gonna lose Cloud for a little bit. So I'm just overall excited to see how they incorporate those two characters, the synergy stuff, but some other characters that people may not be thinking about, and this is kind of, you know, something that could actually happen, is the trio from Crisis Core: Sephiroth, Angeal, and potentially Genesis. So by the time Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3 comes out, I would assume the first soldier story that they're doing in Ever Crisis, which is focusing on young Sephiroth, his interactions with characters like Angeal and Hojo, will probably be finished by then. And the stuff they're going over in that game in particular is incredibly important. Sephiroth in general in this remake trilogy is even more important than he was in the original game. He's got so much more agency now. They're adding so much to his lore. And this is stuff that's going to be important for the player to understand. And for people who didn't play Ever Crisis by that point in time, they're going to need to know at least the, you know, important bullet points of what's happening with Sephiroth. So by that point, you could pick and choose all of the really important character moments for young Sephiroth in Ever Crisis and just put them in the beginning of Remake Part 3 and let us play as young Sephiroth. Maybe it's a mission where it is Sephiroth, Angeal, and Genesis, and that's our opening, that's our tutorial, allowing us to control these three mega powerful characters that have all of the like level 3 spells, insane damage scaling, kind of giving the player a preview of what your characters will eventually become by the end of the game. And again, getting those character interactions with those characters, learning more about Sephiroth, it's going to be so much more vital. And you can even do what they've done in Ever Crisis and kind of flash back to the Edge of Creation with that Sephiroth who's really kind of reflecting on his life before the full game kicks in and we go back to Cloud and party. So incorporating those characters, I think, would be sick. And to be honest, I want to play as Genesis. I want to play as Angeal in this type of combat. And you could have easily taken the story that they're doing with Ever Crisis and made that its own full-blown AAA project with the combat system of the 7 Remake trilogy, and it would have probably been banger because it's got a great story, great writing, great character stuff, and the combat, you know, just pretty much speaks for itself. So opening up with the young Sephiroth stuff, just kind of giving the player a crash course in what's been going on with this guy and what we're going to see further in the game, I think is incredibly important, because with this being the final part of the trilogy, they're going to tell us Sephiroth's entire plan, what strings he pulled to manipulate certain people and situations, why did he show up in this spot, why did he choose to do this thing. It's going to be sick. And then, of course, speaking of Crisis Core, there is Zack, which the developers put so much work into crafting Zack in Rebirth, and we only get to use him in a handful of fights. And he's not just a character that you use, he's got basic attacks. He has an actual gimmick to him. He's got that charge gimmick where if you time your charge button just right, you can do a full charge in between a combo, you can cancel stuff. So they really put so much thought into crafting a character like Zack, and I think a lot of that was in preparation for part 3, where he's probably going to be playable in much bigger chunks of the game, so you need him to feel like a standout, unique character. So I'm very curious to see what kind of improvements they make to him in particular, because I thought he was so much fun when we did get to use him in Rebirth, even if it was just for a limited amount of time. But also expect upgrades to characters like Red 13 and Kate Sith, because Rebirth was the first time we got to control these characters, and obviously there's going to be player feedback on how they control, what abilities are great, what kind of things they struggle with. So I would expect those two characters, especially Red, to get some really big buffs in Remake Part 3, especially buffs to help them deal with airborne enemies. Now, the next most important thing would be the Highwind. So again, Naoki Hamaguchi, who is the director of Rebirth as well as Remake Part 3, didn't exactly go into details about the Highwind. He just really hyped it up and said, look, the stuff that we're coming up with the Highwind is going to be mind-blowing. I believe that was the actual phrase he used, was mind-blowing. He then, would go on to say that he thinks that Remake Part 3 is going to be one of the best, most loved games in all of gaming, which are lofty things to say. Even Katase was getting in on this, saying like, I'm truly impressed with what Hamaguchi has done, and I think you guys will be as well. And some people might say, oh, well, that's just hyperbole, they want to sell copies. To me, that's a very big deal that they would say this, because traditionally, Japanese developers are pretty reserved when it comes to promoting their games. They'll say things like, we're really excited about this game, we hope you enjoy it, please be excited, please play our game, please check it out. And Hamaguchi is just straight up going out there with like the thug pose, being like, yeah, our game fucking rules. It's going to be one of the best games ever made, and you guys are going to love it. No, obviously that's hyperbole, but the amount of confidence that they're showing and what they're building speaks a lot, because that is not very common. That's a very rare occurrence with Japanese developers to be so confident in what they're producing, which is pretty exciting. Now, in regards to the airship, obviously the standard stuff, flying around the entirety of the world map, reaching specific locations we couldn't on foot. But one of the cool things that you guys have brought up are the idea of air battles with the Highwind. Now, Sid says in Rebirth, Shinra does not own the skies, which is true, but you can bet your balls that they're going to try and own that sky in part 3 and go after Cloud and crew. So we could have random air battles with the Highwind where we get into these really cool airship fights where we're firing bullets and missiles and rockets against all of these other Shinra pilots, which they show that stuff off in Rebirth. There is the moment when you get to Junon and you see the Highwind for the first time, and that thing is huge. It's beautiful, but they also make it a point to show you a bunch of other aircrafts on that landing pad, which you can bet your butt we're going to see those guys again. So doing some type of air combat, whether it just be real time flying around, maybe they do some sort of weird turn-based thing with the air stuff. You know, if you wanted to be kind of cheeky and incorporate more traditional turn-based stuff, but just using it in the sky. You could also have modifications for the Highwind, because that's going to be our hub area once we get it. We're going to have our chocobos on there. We're going to have a great crew. We're probably going to be able to do things like Queen's Blood. I wouldn't be shocked if there's some sort of store on there, or maybe a VR simulator room on the Highwind. But obviously there's also going to be things that the Highwind is limited on. It can't do right out the gate. But towards the end of the game, when the Highwind fully unlocks its true power and we get those jet engines, that's when we're going to be able to do a lot of cooler stuff in the air, not just in terms of airship battles, but with exploration as well. So how they handle the airship stuff, airship combat, I think is going to be super exciting, but it also adds this, you know, new element to gameplay and combat that I think makes it way more fresh instead of just doing, you know, on foot battles. And of course, you know, there's the weapons too. We still got to figure out a way to fight the weapons, and the airship could come in handy with some of that stuff. Now, in terms of combat, obviously they've done a really great job building from Remake to Rebirth, making combat just feel so much better. Characters like Cloud and Tifa can now deal with airborne enemies in a much easier way now, instead of having to rely solely on characters like Barrett. We're not going to have Aerith anymore, so that's that's not an option. But Yuffie again is very much a multitask character that can do just about everything. She's so broken. But then there's the thought of adding not just synergy attacks with 2 characters, but the whole idea of tri-techs, now getting 3 characters involved on one big attack, which they've kind of teased with the battle against Genova at the end of Rebirth, where everyone's just getting in on the action. You could even upgrade the limit break system to have it be a synergy limit break system. So if everyone has their limits, maybe everyone has a specific amount of those synergy pips filled up, you could then do one mega attack to an enemy in the game, I think, which would be insane. And they're most likely going to utilize the PlayStation 5 Pro for Remake Part 3. So this is going to be a much more technologically intensive game. And I think you might need, you know, the power of the Pro to kind of pull some of that stuff off. But the idea of seeing 3 characters at a time team up to do this really sick limit attack, I think is just awesome. And I think that's something that they will do, because the developers have talked about in previous videos about giving the player more freedom in combat. And I think allowing players to just bust open that gameplay and do tri-techs or do group limit attacks, or incorporating the backline command even more. And I know the PHS system was in 7 Remake, and I think it was also in Rebirth as well, but it was used purely just to communicate back and forth between characters. So if you want to take the PHS system out of that just kind of phone call thing and have it actually be incorporated into battle where you're now swapping characters in and out, I think it'd be sick. It'd be kind of like a cool callback to Final Fantasy X, where it's like, oh crap, there's an airborne character, I need Waka, let's swap him in. Now it's kind of like that. You got an airborne enemy, the easiest way to take him out, Barrett, Vincent, Sid, Yuffie, swap that character in, you're good to go. You know, really let us take full advantage of everybody that we have in our party. Let us do some Advent Children style stuff where everyone's getting in on the action, whether it be cutscene or in actual combat. There's just so much there that they can do, and that they probably will do. Now, in terms of player freedom, this is a really big one, and that's exploration. So one of the criticisms I saw pop up quite a bit on, you know, videos where we talked about Rebirth, and I think this is a very valid criticism that I kind of agree with in certain aspects, and that's exploration not really feeling organic. You get to an area and you have your map. You've got Chadley who kind of guides you through every area, and it really does end up feeling like, okay, well, I'm going to go to this spot. I finished that. Let's check that box off. Now let's go to this other area, which Chadley just told me about. Let's check this off. And it kind of, repeats itself. So it kind of feels like you're being not necessarily handheld, but guided through an area. Now you can avoid that if you want just by exploring on your own, but you're still going to have situations where Chadley's going to pop up and tell you about something or show a new location for you. And the developers in a previous interview with Anime News Network said they want the player to have way more freedom when it comes to exploration. And when you look at the evolution of this remake trilogy, it makes all the sense in the world. 7 Remake, very linear, you're in Midgar, you have some other side quests you can do here and there, but it's very self-contained. Rebirth mostly opens up the world, allows the player to go through and learn how to navigate and figure out what these lands are, what specific things are in certain areas, what enemies, all of that good stuff. It kind of teaches the player how to navigate this land. So for Remake Part 3, the natural progression of that would be take the training wheels off. You are now in control of how you explore a specific area. And I think that also goes hand in hand with one of the things I've been speculating on is that we could probably lose Chadley. And if there's no Chadley there, there's no one to tell us like, hey, there's a cave over there, or there's an enemy over here, or go activate that tower. It's going to be up to us to do that on our own now. And again, the developers of the Remake trilogy don't just make changes to make changes. They usually take the story changes and they apply them in ways that make sense to the gameplay, very much like combat. Rebirth was all about relationships and growing these characters and having them become genuine, close friends, and that reflected itself in the folio system. It reflected itself in combat, these characters working together with the synergy skills and abilities. So why not take that and also apply it to Part 3? Because one of the things about Rebirth that people did not like were the Remna Wave towers, which in story, they had their purpose. They were originally constructed by the Republic of Junon, but then after the war, Shinra would take over them. So not having Remna Wave towers in Remake Part 3 would be a nice gameplay mechanic, but it also, again, goes in hand with the story, because if Junon erected that's a really funny word, those towers on one specific section of the world, it would make sense that the other section of the world would not have Remna Wave towers. Because Junon didn't go that far, maybe Shinra also after the war just decided to not explore that far and incorporate new towers. So we're going to be exploring lands potentially that don't have those Remna Wave towers that we have to activate. So therefore we don't have this weird beacon going out showing us where everything is at. And if we don't have Chadley again, we're on our own, baby. It's the best way to explore. It's just get to an open area, pick a direction like Barrett says, and just follow it. And if you look at the games that Hamaguchi-san has cited that have influenced Rebirth, Horizon Forbidden West, Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima, those games kind of work that way. You have a map, you can see what's on the map, but a lot of stuff you just discover on your own by running around. If I'm running around Tsushima Island, I come across this new area, it then gets added to my map instead of someone telling me specifically about the area or the area already being marked on my map. I'm the one who found it. I'm the one who explored, did all the footwork, came across this specific thing. So that just makes sense for Remake Part 3 to also follow suit and do that. And there are situations too in Tsushima where you save someone who's being attacked by the bad guys, you go and free them, and then they tell you, hey, I heard that there is a territory in this area where the enemies have set up camp, and you can then go to that place on the map. So you can still have people tell you like, hey, I heard about this specific area, maybe you want to go check that out. And it also harkens back to old school Final Fantasy. I think of a game like Final Fantasy X and the celestial weapons, the ultimate weapons you can get for your characters. The game doesn't tell you how to do any of that stuff. You have to acquire the celestial mirror, but you can't use it right away because it needs to be cleaned. So you have to figure out, okay, where do I take this mirror to get it activated? And then once you activate it, the game still doesn't tell you like, okay, now go do this, this, and this. You have to figure out with experimenting on your own, how do I utilize this thing I just got? What's it even for? Which I think is so key to a Final Fantasy, and it's something that Rebirth was missing that a lot of people want, is just let me explore. Let me come across this super secret hidden dungeon that I almost bypassed because I wasn't paying proper attention. Since there's no Remna Wave towers and there's no Chadley, oh look, I just came across this cave that happens to have natural materia in it, summon materia at that. Make it an experience that really harkens back to those old games that require the player to use a little bit of brain power and figure things out on their own, find new hidden things, have actual genuine secrets, which again, the developers have stated that they want to do. They want players to just kind of come across things and have things be missable. You know, that's how it was in the OG FF7. When you were exploring on foot, there was always something in the distance that you could see, a hidden cave, and you're like, dang it, I don't have whatever I need to get to that cave because it's a different terrain. Or maybe you can access a specific area, but you're cut off from the rest of it because you don't have the Highwind. So you have to figure out, okay, I actually do need to get a chocobo to get to this area that I can't explore on foot. Or I need to get to a higher elevation to drop my characters off with the Highwind. It's really all about incorporating some of those classic things from the original FF7 that the developers have done, I think, a pretty good job of doing so far. And again, that natural progression is just to give that player all of the freedom in the world. If I miss something, it sucks, but I missed it and I can find it on a separate playthrough. And those aspects of the original, older Final Fantasy games were some of my favorites. Just flying around in a ship, coming across some sort of weird structure and being able to go there, like Final Fantasy VIII, finding the abandoned research facility that's underwater and you make your way to the bottom and Bahamut is there. And he's like, oh, you guys want me to join you? Well, you gotta fight me first, sucker. Stuff like that is just so magical, and it adds to that experience of like, wow, I'm really on this really grand adventure. And with it being the final part of the trilogy, I think the developers really want it to be balls to the wall, this big open grand adventure where you can do everything that you want to do when you want to do it. So with that being said, that is the video. I know there were some repeat things that we discussed, but again, you guys had some really great suggestions that I kind of wanted to just kind of combine into one video and kind of have it be a resource where we could talk about some of that stuff. I know there's been a lot of new viewers to the channel, so I don't expect everyone who's new to the channel to go back and watch every video I've done. So to kind of have everything we've discussed to a degree in this video, I think would be kind of helpful. And if you are someone who is new here and you haven't checked out my back catalog of videos, I'll leave links to some of the more important videos where we discuss with the community things we loved about Rebirth, things we want to see in 7 Remake. All those cool changes that we don't mention in this video will be in those videos if you guys got some time to kill and you want to go back and just kind of check those videos out. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you guys think about Remake Part 3? What are some other things you guys want to see in Remake Part 3 that maybe we didn't discuss? Are there things you want to see changed? Was there something specifically from Rebirth that you loved so much that you want them to bring back in Part 3? Let me know in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.